Thank you, Adrian. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation this morning. The intention of this talk is really to give you guys an overview of some of the research we've been doing here at Napier University in regards to IoT security testing. This project is done in collaboration with Keysight Technologies, and we are being funded by Census. Within the scope of this talk, it's going to be a reasonably high-level overview of some of the work we're doing. Some of the results I do present, I'm aware that I don't go into as much technical detail as perhaps some people would like. And this is really just due to time constraints. So if there are any questions, do feel free to ask me after the talk or perhaps during the next coffee break. Okay, to quickly begin, so my name is Owen Lowe. I'm currently a research fellow here at Napier University, and I suppose at this point in time, I've had quite a lot of experience working in numerous fields of computing. But my primary areas of research include digital forensics, hardware and software security, data governance, and also e-health, as that was part of my PhD. Naturally, my current research area is in this topic of IoT security. So, quick bit of background. What is IoT then? Depending on who you ask and who you talk to, you may very well find that you get slightly different definitions of what exactly IoT is. And I think part of the reason for this is simply due to the generic nature of a IoT device. In theory, you could even argue that your mobile phone is an IoT device since it's got internet connectivity and it's got a bunch of sensors. However, if we do turn to literature, there are agreed upon definitions of what IoT is, and one I particularly like is the one I'm citing here. IoT refers to technologies which have the capability of ubiquitously sharing and inferring data from both its environment and other devices. And I suppose the key word there really is ubiquitous. Another way of saying something that's omnipresent, that's always kind of around us. I like to also think that IoT devices are non-intrusive. Fundamentally, they are devices which are residing around a living environment, collecting data, and then providing some meaningful positive feedback to the user, hopefully. There's a lot of use cases that IoT devices can be used in. For example, wearable healthcare devices. This includes your Fitbits, your Polars, maybe your Apple iWatch as well. Fundamentally, these are watches that you wear, and with a series of sensors, it will perhaps capture your physiological signs, your heart rate, your SpO2 levels. It might be monitoring your cardiovascular activity, and the feedback it's trying to provide is fundamentally how well is your fitness regime going, how healthy of a person are you, how many calories are you burning, and so on. A slightly more complex use case might be smart cars, whereby we've got sensors in both the immediate surroundings of a car and the internal sensors of a car as well. With the immediate sensors, they may be monitoring traffic to avoid any collisions if it's an autonomous car. With the, I suppose, internal sensors, it may be monitoring the mechanical and electrical aspects of your car to ensure that nothing goes wrong and to raise some form of alert if something does go wrong. Scaling up a little bit, we've got now this idea of what is known as smart cities, basically IoT devices and sensors which are ubiquitously distributed throughout a living environment, such as the city of Edinburgh. There's so many possibilities with these kind of smart city use cases. For example, it might be used to monitor traffic and to divert traffic if there are any traffic during rush hour, for example. It might be used to monitor the temperature or humidity within a park and maybe turn the sprinklers if the temperature is too high one day with too low humidity and so on. The key point here is that IoT provides a lot of positive impact to users. However, if we look at the security aspect of IoT when it comes to literature, one of the key talking points I found recently is that IoT has many security challenges. That's from a few citations there of recent literature. What we found within our research is that a lot of researchers have shown that there are known vulnerabilities with consumer-ready IoT devices out there. And it's my opinion that at this moment in time, there is no one definitive answer as to how do we go about ensuring an IoT device is considered secure. So from a research perspective, this is great because it gives us a lot of potential to produce a lot of research, to do experiments, to publish results, and to disseminate. However, despite me recognizing this fact, when I was first brought on to work on this project, the first question I really asked myself is, what does IoT security testing actually involve? And I realized that this question is actually a bit more difficult for me to answer than I anticipated. And it comes down to the generic nature of IoT devices. So I realized that in order to try and better answer our question, we need some formal taxonomy, a classification of what exactly the key components and aspects of an IoT device are. So I did a lot of reading, and one of the first documents that I came across, which I felt was very useful, was a document by GSMA titled GSMA IoT Security Guidelines. Within the scope of this figure, anyway, they provided a high-level overview of the core aspects of what makes up an IoT device. And fundamentally, there are three primary aspects here. We've got our IoT service ecosystem on the far left there. This is basically the servers and databases controlled and managed by the developer and manufacturer of certain IoT devices. It's fundamentally where the data is stored and processed, and any analysis of that data would take place there. It may also include your public-facing APIs, so that other developers can write software to interface with any data stored in that IoT service ecosystem. In the middle there, we have our communications network, and this is primarily the internet aspect of IoT. That enables basically the IoT device to communicate with our service ecosystem and potentially also communicate with other devices if that's one of the capabilities. Last but not least, we've got our endpoint ecosystem. And it's the endpoint ecosystem whereby this includes the physical hardware of the device alongside any software that you, the user, interact with. So if you're interacting with, say, a Fitbit, then it's the physical watch alongside the software and the user interface that you're interacting with. That would be considered the endpoint ecosystem here. So in terms of a high-level overview, the GSMA standard does give us a good articulation of what the key aspects of an IoT device are, what it's made up of. However, in order for us to do any security testing on IoT, we do need to drill down into a bit more detail. And in particular, what we want to look at is what is known as IoT attack surfaces. This attack surface is a working document drafted by the OWASP IoT project, and I feel it's a very, very good one. Fundamentally, what the OWASP IoT project is stating is that within the current work in progress draft, there are currently 15 attack surfaces that, say, a security expert or a penetration tester should focus on when evaluating whether or not an IoT device is considered secure. So I'm not going to go through each and every one of these attack surfaces in detail. You can look at a document for that instead. But at a quick glance, you can probably see that most of the attack surfaces will be shared commonly with most IoT devices. You've got your device firmware, web interfaces, network services, local storage, and so on. So when I first started working on this project, I did a lot of reading in regards to IoT attack taxonomies and taxonomies in general. And eventually, I arrived at our current proposed attack taxonomy. This taxonomy is very much early work in progress, but fundamentally it's derived from the existing literature and work that I've just described. What I'm trying to state here with this taxonomy is that in order for us to effectively evaluate the security of IoT devices, we need to focus on 4 primary component layers of an IoT device. The hardware component, for example, is a device susceptible to side channel attacks, which is a topic I'll cover actually in a bit later on in this talk. With device software, we're looking at whether or not, for example, the software is implemented in a secure manner. Is the device firmware locked down correctly so attacker doesn't have full control over the system? Is the data stored in a local data storage stored in an encrypted format, or worse still, is it stored in a plain text format, which would not be ideal? With device connectivity, what we're looking at here is more traditional network security. Does the IoT device communicate and receive its data using standard well-known security protocols? Is it sharing its data using HTTPS instead of sending data in plain text? Does it use certificates, and are those certificates up to date? The same idea kind of applies for the device service point also. Is the device service points implemented using standard security practices? If it's using, for example, the OAuth 2.0 protocol, are the tokens managed and secured correctly? So, excuse me. Basically, in order to try and validate how well our current taxonomy represents a real-life IoT device, what we've been doing at this point in this project is trying to enumerate through each of these attack surfaces, and by picking off off-the-shelf IoT devices, we wanted to see how viable attacking each of the individual surfaces of an IoT device are. And in the remaining parts of this presentation, what I will focus on is two primary use cases, some preliminary results that we've achieved related to the device physical interface and device network of our chosen IoT devices under test. With our device network use case, what we're doing is more traditional network-based vulnerability analysis of any Ethernet-enabled IoT devices. With our physical interface, we're trying to determine whether or not an IoT device is susceptible to any side channel attacks, in particular power analysis attacks. And in particular, the target we're focused on is a cryptographic algorithm known as Present. Present is an algorithm designed specifically to run on low-power devices, i.e. IoT devices, due to its low memory usage alongside its low footprint in general. So we thought it's a very viable algorithm to look at because it's more than likely that an IoT device may use this present algorithm for any cryptographic functions. Let's have a look first, however, at the vulnerability analysis of Ethernet-enabled IoT devices. Within this use case, we did pick a lot of devices to scan, but I'm just going to focus on one particular result, which is a Netgear router that we had lying around in the office. The tools we're using are pretty much off the shelf here. We've got a tool called OpenFast, an open source network scanner, which allows an attacker or a penetration tester to point it to one or more devices, and it would basically do a network scan on that device and try and detect whether or not there's any known vulnerabilities with that device. OpenFast comes with a vulnerabilities database which is contributed by the open source communities. So naturally, it's probably up to date with the most well-known and recent vulnerabilities. So we did a scan against this Netgear router here, and it did pick up quite a few issues, but the two most severe, listed in the top figure here, hopefully you can see it, are shown. The latter issue, OpenFast is stating that the router is susceptible to HTTP brute force login. And this is basically just because the router was in its default factory settings. So I believe OpenFast was able to log into that router using the credentials of admin for username, and also password was admin. So naturally, if you see this kind of issue with your IoT device under test, then you should probably change the standard password, as it were. A much more interesting vulnerability noted with this Netgear router is the most severe vulnerability at the top there. Basically, OpenFast detected that this router was susceptible to what's known as the Netgear information disclosure vulnerability, which was first described by some security experts on the website Seclist, which I've linked here. So I'm not stating that I found these vulnerabilities myself. However, the point there is that within a subset of these routers which run a certain version of the firmware, it enables a user to turn on a remote service access port with this router. There are legitimate uses for this remote access port. Basically, it allows an administrator to remotely connect to that router and issue some forms of commands. I think it allows the admin to, for example, change the SSID broadcasting on that router. It can show you how many clients are connected to that router. And it can also even enable you to change the password, the Wi-Fi password for that router too, I believe. Anyway, what these attackers or security experts found out was that by querying a specific type of message to this remote service, they could actually trick the router into disclosing a lot more information than it ever should. In this case, we were able to run their example script, and very quickly, it revealed both the plain text password of the admin console, despite us changing the password, and even more worryingly, the Wi-Fi password of that router as well. So what's interesting as a side note here is that when I first saw this vulnerability in action, I had a quick look on Amazon, and I believe that they are still selling this router out there. And for someone who's not that technically savvy, let's say, they may very well have purchased this router, installed it in their home, and it could very well still be running in their home with this vulnerability. Luckily, the vulnerability itself can be mitigated so long as you do ensure your firmware is up to date. So trying to relate that back to IoT in general, one of the key things you probably should do with any IoT device that you have purchased and are using in your home environment is probably to update the firmware, just to ensure there's no issues there. But moving on, another area of attack surfaces that we've been looking at is what is known as the hardware aspects of IoT device. And in particular, what we're focused on here is a form of a side channel attack known as power analysis. For those who are not familiar, basically the idea behind power analysis is that we're monitoring the power consumption of a, say, IoT device as it's running certain cryptographic operations. Using correlation, modeling, and statistics in general, we can, in theory, try and correlate the power consumption to specific private key guesses of that cryptographic algorithm. So with a symmetric key algorithm, if you, the attacker, are able to deduce the full private key of an algorithm, then you can, in theory, decrypt and unlock a lot of data that you probably should not be able to view. So that's exactly what we try to do in this case here. Our device under test is a Arduino Uno, as you can see in the left picture there, since we had that existing experimental setup. And it was implemented to run the symmetric key algorithm known as present. The tools we're using here is oscilloscope, which is provided to us by Keysight. And what we're doing here is that we've programmed the Arduino Uno to run encryption functions using present. And as it's running that, we're probing the power pin on the 80 mega chip and gathering enough power traces to hopefully perform our attack. And the result is as follows. One little side note here before I continue is that I should note present is a 10-byte cryptographic algorithm. Basically, you need 10 bytes of a key in order to encrypt or decrypt any data. We found with a reasonably well-known as standard at this point, correlation power analysis attack, we were able to deduce 8 out of the 10-byte keys in the present algorithm. So we weren't able to gather all 10 keys. However, in theory, we can actually just brute force the remaining 2-byte keys so long as we know what position those 2 key guesses are in. And that's because there are only 256 to the power of 2 possibilities there. That's also assuming that the IoT device gives some form of meaningful yes or no response when we try and guess the correct key. OK, so in summary, hopefully you guys have seen that there's a wide variety of attack surfaces that we must consider when testing IoT devices for security purposes. The tools and techniques required for testing IoT security can range from reasonably simple off-the-shelf software such as OpenFast and Kali Linux to slightly more complex ones such as acquiring an oscilloscope if you want to do side-channel attacks. We believe to determine if an IoT device is secure, we need to try and enumerate through each and every one of the known attack surfaces to cover all our possibilities, so to speak. Last but not least, our goal and overall vision for this project is to try and provide some form of concise IoT security testing methodology, which can potentially be used by the end consumer or even maybe the manufacturer of IoT devices. So that's my talk there. The last slide is simply a list of references, which I use throughout this presentation. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask me now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Owen. Comprehensive as ever. That was fantastic. We have time for a couple of questions. Does anybody have anything to ask?
Adrian, sorry.
Yep.
Just in regards to the recent scares. Do I need a microphone? Oh, sorry. I'm just looking for your professional and research opinion in regards to the recent scares around the Draytech routers and also the likes of TP-Link and Linksys and that vulnerability in the engineering.
I'm not actually familiar with that one there. Can you provide some additional information about that one?
Oh, sorry. No. There was some recent international media releases in regards to the engineering in Draytech routers and other such like equipment that was very vulnerable to side channel attacks and others.
I see. OK.
Sorry. We'll speak over lunch.
I mean, to give you an answer then, no, I have no opinion on that matter as I'm not aware of it right now. But it's something we need to chat about. Thank you very much for letting me know.
So I can elaborate slightly on that. There are a series of routers. These are the cheaper routers in the market where power engineering is particularly weak, usually built on a particular price point. The Chinese particularly exemplify that level of engineering quality, if you can call it that, where they do exhibit some of the cheaper components. Because of this, when you have processors that take significant chunks out of power supplies, their suppression is less than ideal. You can pretty much put a ferrite core, on the power supply to try and get rid of some of the harmonics and some of the noise that comes from it. So this does exhibit exactly that side channel attack vectors. So you need physical access. This is not something that you can do remotely. You do need physical access, but that's not impossible. So these are vulnerabilities, and where we are seeing this is within more of a corporate environment. Nobody would potentially go into your home to put some kind of probe on your router unless you were Trump, Putin, or somebody else like that. But it is a concern. It most definitely is a concern, because it plays to the quality of the electronics that we have around us for these particular IoT devices. Cameras being the exemplar of that. Very badly designed. Almost all of them are the same, even though they're branded as though they're not. So it becomes our problem. So to try and answer a little bit of your problem. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions?
Hi. You talked about the guessing of 8 out of 10 bits of the encryption key. What sort of information do you get about the location of the bits that have been guessed? The bytes that have been guessed and the bytes that have not been guessed?
With the correct key guesses, they are sequential, meaning that they are either the first 8 bytes or the last 8 bytes. In this case, because one thing I forgot to note, my apologies, is that we're in a very much a sandbox environment within that experiment there. We know for a fact it's the first 8 bytes of the key. But regardless, I believe in any case, if it was a black box test, we still know it's sequential. It may not be the first 8 bytes or it may be the last, but it's still sequential.
Thank you.
Okay.